Hi, I'm Adam Pritchard, and I'm back with another tale of ancient life. Paleontology is often thought of as a science of giants, and a lot of the things I've talked about in this series are giant animals. Giant whales, giant dinosaurs, giant birds, even giant scallops like Chesapeake-ten. But if you only think about the giants when you think of paleontology, you're missing a huge portion of the story of life on our planet. A lot of things happen among tiny organisms. Today, I'm going to be talking about some tiny vertebrate animals with backbones, that were recovered from a site that is near and dear to my heart. This is the tale of the Cumberland Cave microvertebrates. Now, what does it mean to be a microvertebrate? Well, these are those small remains of vertebrate animals in the fossil record. Usually it refers to bones that are between an inch, say, and under a millimeter. These things can get tiny. And they can be from all kinds of different animals that enter the fossil record. The Virginia Museum of Natural History actually houses a couple of collections of microvertebrate material from a number of different sites, some in Virginia and one from Maryland. And that's the Cumberland Cave site. When I was a little boy, I traveled to western Maryland, specifically the town of Frostburg, quite a bit. My grandma, Pappy, and Aunt Christie lived there, and we visited them all the time. And quite frequently, we rode the train on the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad that runs from the city of Cumberland to the town of Frostburg. And along that passage, the train conductor always wanted to point out the Cumberland Cave fossil site. During construction of the railroad in 1912, workers discovered a fossil site that was subsequently worked by scientists from the Smithsonian and the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What they found was an extraordinary fossil deposit that contained animals that lived about 800,000 years ago in Maryland. This is still in the depths of the Ice Age. Maryland was not completely covered in glaciers, but it was a much colder place than it is today. And it contained a wide range of large animals, from bears to deer to mastodon, even saber-toothed cats. But in among all of those things were the microvertebrates, the tiny specimens of different kinds of vertebrate animals that also lived 800,000 years ago in western Maryland. Thanks to the collecting efforts of paleontologist Fred Grady, a microvertebrate expert, the Virginia Museum of Natural History has a sample of microvertebrate bones from the Cumberland Cave site. And they're hard to show people because I get excited about them, but they're so tiny that I can't just hold up a box to the camera. As you can see, there's a lot of little bones in there. Every one of those is a bone or a tiny fragment of an animal. There's a lot to sort through, and it's hard to show people. Unless you got a microscope camera, which I do. Here you can see some of the Cumberland Cave microvertebrate material in its jumbled state once it's out of the rock. It's just a huge mess with all kinds of different animals mixed together, different anatomical pieces. It's a puzzle, and it can be a lot of fun to sort out if you enjoy this sort of thing. So let's take a look at what we've got. See one piece right here. Alright, this one that has sort of a very rounded, almost cylinder-shaped hinge joint at the end of it, that is a bat humerus, specifically the distal end, the part that forms the elbow joint in the living animal. They're quite narrow among mammals, and if I flip it to the side, you can see it has sort of big, rounded depressions on each side. So that's how we're able to identify that. It's fun. Now there's another bat bone right here. This spherical structure with this two projections sitting alongside it. This is the proximal end, the top part of a bat femur. So the bat thigh bone, and the spherical portion is what would form the hip joint in a bat. Yeah, passing through this, lots of bones that have yet to be identified. Different experts should look at this as with any fossil collection. But here's an exciting one. Okay, let's pick this up. This very complicated bone right here is one I know in an instant. Come on, flip over. No! This is a vertebra. It's a very special kind of vertebrate, too. So it has articular surface. We're looking at it now from the top down. It has big, prominent projections on the front and the back that allow the articulation with other vertebrae. This almost rectangular spine that sticks up from those projections. And then if we flip it on its front, if I can get it to cooperate. Well, this is taking way too long. I'd rather have it take way too long than break it on camera. Ah, there we go. I think. Yep, there we go. So here, you can see those projections frame a large cavity called the neural canal that would pass the spinal cord. And then there's this huge depression on the front surface. And the back surface, we have a huge kind of rounded convex articulation. This is a mostly complete vertebra of a snake, a decent-sized snake too, something that would have been in the range of 2 or 3 feet. Although it's not huge, snakes actually have hundreds of backbones in their bodies. So, as a result, and the fact that the rest of the snake skeleton is quite lightly built, vertebrae and ribs of snakes are pretty much the whole of their fossil record. So it's unsurprising to see those kinds of bones at the Cumberland Cave site. Ice Age snakes. Really like that idea. Pass through this a little bit more, see if there's anything else. Lots and lots of limb bones, as I was saying. This is another one of those bat femora. Spherical projection framed by 2 smaller projections. Bats are undeniably the most common pieces of the Cumberland Cave microvertebrate collections. Animals that lived and died and were fossilized in their cave home. Ooh, here's an interesting one. This is another backbone. Much like the snake, it has a big rounded concavity on one end. If I flip it over, we should see a very prominent, yep, there it is, convex surface on the other end. But it's a lot flatter top to bottom than the snake. You can also see it has broken surfaces on each side where there would have been prominent projections hanging off the side. This is a vertebra, all right, but not of a snake or a lizard. This is from a frog. Decent-sized frog, too. These are also common elements of the Cumberland Cave site, probably a lot more than the snakes and the lizards. Mostly, again, vertebrae, although we get a lot of limb bones as well. Those tend to be quite long and slender, but pretty sturdy. Speaking of frogs, here's another element of one here, this time from the skull. This kind of weird T-shaped bone with the widened surface on the one end and the narrow tapered surface on the other is actually part of the cavity that contains the nasal structures for the frog, specifically the neurons for the olfactory system. It's a series of tubes, effectively. Frogs have a very well ossified brain case structure. That is, it's framed by a whole lot of bone that develops as the animals develop. You see both openings right there. So that's cool, a little frog nasal capsule. Ah, here's an exciting one. Grab this right here. This right here is the petrous temporal or petrosal bone of a bat. It contains the organs of hearing and balance. And inside of this is a complex coiled structure called the cochlea that is basically the key to hearing in bats. Oh, cool. And right alongside it is a different kind of humerus. Showed you in mammals how there tends to be a sort of cylinder-shaped distal end that forms the elbow joint. In this kind of animal, the distal end of the elbow is very much rounded and forms a huge ball. This is the distal end of a frog humerus. So again, jumble of animals, huge puzzle to figure out. In paleontology, there are a lot of unsung heroes, and I think microvertebrates count as one of those. They're not as visually impressive as a giant mastodon skeleton, at least not initially until you look at them under a microscope, but they still tell us extraordinary stories about what was happening at small scales in ecosystems of the ancient past. It still amazes me that the Cumberland Cave, which I remember hearing about during visits with Grandma and Pappy, is now part of the collection that I am tasked with curating. It's a great honor and responsibility, and I'm excited to share it with all of you. For young scientists at home right now, here's an assignment for you. Imagine that you find a collection of microvertebrate bones like the ones from the Cumberland Cave site. Using only the tools that you have available to you in your house, how would you move those little bones around? What is the most delicate tool you could use to make sure that you didn't break any of them, but you were still able to put them into little boxes or whatever you're going to contain them in? It can be anything in your bathroom, your kitchen. Just remember, you want to make sure you can move things around, but you don't break them. That's the trouble with fossils. They've been around for a long time, but they get really, really fragile after a couple 100,000 years, let alone some million years. Oof.